Hello and welcome to Protect Ukraine Now YouTube channel. As I record this video, the Senate is getting ready to vote on HR 815, which is also known as Emergency National Security Supplemental Appropriations Act 2024. This legislation includes assistance to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and also contains border security. For that reason, the Senate is unlikely to pass this legislation as it is, but there's a good chance they will vote separately on Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan assistance. So foreign assistance will be voted separately from border security. And hopefully this legislation will pass. Right now is a good time to look at this bill and see what's on the table. The legislation itself is a pretty long document. It has 370 pages, and I'm not going to go through it, of course, but I'm going to post a link to this document in the description to this video. What we're going to do, though, is go through line items that we're specifically interested in. So what's in the Emergency National Security Supplemental Appropriations Act 2024 for Ukraine? If you don't have the time to watch this video to the end, here's a summary page. The Presidential Drawdown Authority is set to $13.4 billion. As a reminder, PDA, or Presidential Drawdown Authority, is immediate assistance. The president has authority to transfer military assistance to a foreign country. And $13.4 billion is money allocated as replenishment funds back to the Department of Defense. USAI is Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. $13.7 billion will be allocated to Ukraine for long-term military needs. This money, again, will be spent by the Department of Defense. And once the munitions is procured, they will be delivered to Ukraine. Economic and other non-military assistance is going to be $8.2 billion. Refugee assistance for Israel and Ukraine is set to $3.5 billion. So we have to account that some of that money will actually be for Israel. And then foreign military financing, FMF, is $1.6 billion. So total aid for Ukraine per this legislation, if it is going to pass, of course, is going to be roughly $40.4 billion. Now let's do a little reality check. As I explained earlier, PDA is on authority, and authority is set for this year to $7.8 billion. And because money under PDA program is allocated to 3 countries, Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, we need to also prorate the authorization, which is a total amount president is authorized to transfer in 2024. In order to see a more detailed explanation, please stay for the rest of the video. However, if you don't have the time, we estimate that only $5.3 billion in actual equipment, military gear, will be sent to Ukraine. Ukraine security assistance, we leave as it is. However, we should note that $13.7 billion is not equipment we're going to see anytime soon. If this legislation passes, most likely we're going to see deliveries towards the end of the year under this program, could be even later. Economic aid is certainly something Ukraine will be getting sooner than later. I did not include the assistance to refugees in their actual amount of that I believe Ukraine will be getting. Certainly, Ukraine is the beneficiary in this case because Ukraine's citizens are getting assistance. However, this is not money to Ukraine. This is not money to Ukrainian government. So I'm leaving that out here. And finally, $1.6 billion in foreign military financing is also included. This is could be both long-term and short-term assistance. We don't know at this point how this money is going to be spent. So realistically, Ukraine will be getting through this legislation $28.8 billion. So this is both equipment and money going to Ukraine, and this is the amount we estimate. Now, before we continue, I should add that there are additional $4.2 billion in authorizations available from previous years. They will be added to the authorization that we just talked about, the $5.3 billion. However, I don't have this number listed on this slide because over here we're talking about this current bill. So again, if you don't have time for a longer video, this is all you need to know. There are about $28.8 billion in assistance for Ukraine should this bill pass. I do want to encourage you to stay for the rest of the video because we're going to talk about additional line items in this legislation. And also, you must have heard another number. You probably have heard about $60 billion of military assistance for Ukraine. We need to see how this number came about and why it's being discussed. So let's get into some details, and I encourage you to follow the presentation on the screen because there'll be a lot of numbers and they're easier to process when you're looking at them. So let's start with Presidential Drawdown Authority, also known as PDA. The first three line items on the screen are replenishment funds. This is the money that the Department of Defense is getting in order to get reimbursed for their military assistance it will provide, in this case, to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. So as you can see, Israel is getting $4.4 billion, Ukraine is getting 13.4, $1.9 billion are allocated for Taiwan. So altogether, the Department of Defense will be getting $19.7 billion. And in return, it will provide military gear to the said countries up to $7.8 billion. So $7.8 billion is a presidential drawdown authority cap. And if you would like to see where this number is written in this legislation, please go to page 45 and row 6 to 9 explains the following. So Presidential Drawdown Authority is made available through Foreign Assistance Act of 1961. Per Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, the president has an authority on any given year to spend up to $100 million assisting foreign entities as he deems necessary. However, this legislation is going to increase this amount because of unprecedented situation, because of this major war started against Ukraine by Russian Federation. So this number is substituted, and the legislation calls to replace $100 million, which is the default authorization, with $7.8 billion. So this is where this number comes from. Page 45, rows 6 through 9. Now, how did we come up with $5.3 billion for Ukraine? Well, of course, we have to make a scientific guess. So $13.4 billion in replenishment funds for Ukraine is 68% of the total replenishment funds to Department of Defense. So if we're going to take 68% of $7.8 billion in authorizations, we're going to come up with $5.3 billion in presidential drawdown authority that we may expect Ukraine to receive in 2024 should this legislation, of course, pass the Senate and then the House. Another important number that I'd like to show here is procurement of ammunition by United States Army. Let me say right away that I do not believe this money will be spent for the benefit of Ukraine or Israel. It could be not. As you can see, this allocation is listed as in order to respond to the situation in Ukraine. So to respond to the situation in Ukraine, the Department of Defense is going to spend $5.6 billion and then another $801 million to respond to the situation in Israel. Again, we don't know if this ammunition will be going to any of these two countries. What's important to note is that Department of Defense in investing in ammunition production here at home, and I find this very important. That's why I wanted to share with you this number. Moving on, the Army is going to receive a total of $7.5 billion on various needs, including military personnel, operations and maintenance for Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, Space Force, and so on. So this money has nothing to do with Ukraine as far as we can tell. However, this is on the bill with Ukraine name all over it. So it's important that we show this amount. Additional expenses by the U.S. Army include various weapon procurements, other procurement, shipbuilding, which is, of course, our own military expense. I don't think this money has anything to do with Ukraine. There is, however, some $26 million that Navy is going to spend in order to respond to the situation in Ukraine. Now, very hard to tell by looking at the way this is written, where exactly this money will go to and how this possibly related to Ukraine. But apparently this is necessary for the US Navy to receive additional funds in order to be ready to respond in case there's a need for that. Moving on, missile procurement for Air Force to respond to the situation in Ukraine. Again, this very mysterious language, $366 million will go into Air Force needs. Air Force will also be getting additional $2 billion on other procurements related to the situation in Ukraine. Again, no clear understanding if this money is going to benefit Ukraine in any way, or is it something we're doing because of unrest in the region. Additional procurements, here another line item, another $46 million to respond in the situation in Ukraine. Procurement defense-wide, we don't know exactly what's going to be purchased with that money, but because it has Ukraine name in it, I wanted to highlight this line item. It's the same goes to research and development, test and evaluation. Navy, $13 million over there related to Ukraine in some unknown way. And these line items on the slide total $6 billion. More allocations for Ukraine over here. So research, development, test, and evaluation defense wide to respond to the situation in Ukraine. The Congress allocates $194 million. $2 million are going to intelligence community management account to, again, respond to the situation in Ukraine and for related expenses. This could be intelligence Ukraine is going to receive, and these are very much welcomed news. Then additional funds will be made available in this title to the Department of Defense, again, in order to respond to the situation in Ukraine. Another $1 billion to the Department of Defense, and the total on this slide is another $7 billion. And that concludes military assistance. And this slide over here is talking about economic assistance. So as we can see, Ukraine is going to be getting and see over here, this is assistance for Ukraine. This is very clear that this is actual dollar amounts that Ukraine is going to receive. Budget support is $7.8 billion. Additional assistance for Ukraine and countries impacted by the situation in Ukraine is 25 million. So possibly this amount is shared with other countries, but since we don't have any more details, we're going to assume this is money for Ukraine. For the purposes of this video, additional $5.6 billion to respond to the situation in Israel and Ukraine. This is economic assistance, and it's very hard to say by looking at the description how this money is going to be spent. We can also see allocations to help refugees in Israel and Ukraine, another $3.5 billion. And then international narcotic control and law enforcement assistance for Ukraine and countries impacted by the situation in Ukraine, $300 million. I did say this is a humanitarian assistance slide. However, I guess at the bottom, there's a section with FMF. So the $1.6 billion to Ukraine, we already have seen on the first slide. Over here, it's just a repeat of foreign military financing program. In this legislation is being allocated for Israel and Indo-Pacific region, which I'm interpreting as Taiwan. So $7.1 billion in foreign military financing over here. And this takes us to the summary page. Let's review everything we have discussed so far. So the president, if this legislation is to pass, is going to have authorization to provide Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan with up to $7.8 billion of military assistance. We estimated that about $5.3 billion of that assistance could go to Ukraine. Again, there are another $4 billion, $4.2 billion from previous authorizations, and possibly the replenishment funds, the $19.7 billion, will also be used to fund the remaining $4 billion to Ukraine. So in 2024, there's a good chance Ukraine will be getting close to $9.5 billion in PDA of military assistance. However, on this slide, we're talking about the current legislation. That's why that military equipment is not included over here. Again, the Department of Defense will get $19.7 billion in order to get reimbursed. The Department of Defense will also be getting $13.7 billion in USAI funds. It will be converting these funds into military equipment, and Ukraine will receive military equipment when it is ready. USAI have been not a very efficient program so far, and it is highly unlikely that any military gear under this program will be delivered this year, maybe towards the end. Very hard to say. The FMF is set to $1.6 billion for Ukraine, and we're not sure how this money exactly will be spent. It will likely to be a mix of long-term and short-term assistance. So total Ukraine military allocation, that is money to Department of Defense, is $33.5 billion. Another $6.4 billion that will be spent on ammunition. Then other military expenditure is $28 billion. That's again money that we're going to spend on the military, but it is unlikely to be used for Ukraine, though there's a chance that some of that money will be used. In fact, the next line item on this table is listing the amount of the total amount of line items where Ukraine is mentioned. So this again pretty vague to respond to the situation in Ukraine. Language is used quite a lot, and it is mentioned in $20.2 billion of various items that are unlikely to be used to a large degree for Ukraine, but it could be used somewhat. So military aid to Ukraine, something that Ukraine is going to directly benefit from at some point in time, is $20.6 billion altogether, and another $8.2 billion in non-military aid to Ukraine. And the total aid to Ukraine is going to be $28.9 billion. So roughly half of the $60 billion that you may have heard. Now, total military expenses in this legislation is going to be $69.3 billion, and non-military expenses $19.12 billion. Total in this legislation on foreign national security is going to be $88.5 billion. Now, of course, this is not everything. You may have heard that the total bill amount is around $118 billion. That's because that included the border security. At the moment, though, it seems like this bill is going to be split, and the dollar amounts we just covered is most likely what Senate is going to vote on today. I want to show you another document Over here, you can see Emergency National Security Supplemental Appropriation Act summary. So it's a short version of the document that we just reviewed in greater details. This is a summary. And over here, you can see some confusing numbers. I want to show this document because the numbers mentioned over here are not quite accurate. So $19.8 billion over here that the document claims will be spent to replenish US military weapons and equipment provided to Ukraine. We just looked at a detailed breakdown, and $19.8 billion is not just for Ukraine. It is for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. The $13.8 billion to rearm Ukraine is quite accurate. This is USAI funds. And then the last big ticket item over here is $14.8 billion to continue US support to Ukraine through military training, intelligence sharing, increased presence, and other support activities. It is not clear how much of that money is actually going to be going to Ukraine, because of the what I see is as a mistake in the first line item. I'm going to be very skeptical about this extra $14.8 billion for Ukraine. And the reason I'm skeptical is because of other military items where Ukraine is mentioned. As you can see, it is set to $20 billion. And I find it hard to believe that 14 out of them will actually be money to Ukraine. I could be wrong. We just looked at the detailed description on many of these items. If you haven't seen a lot of details over there, is because a lot of details were not provided. I encourage you to look at the actual legislation document, read through yourself. It is a long text, but it is not very difficult to read. So hopefully military assistance to Ukraine and of course humanitarian is going to pass separately from border security portion. One last section of this legislation that I want to talk about is on page 57, and it talks about victory for Ukraine. So what's interesting about this section is apparently to this day, 2 years later, we do not have a good plan. And the Senate is asking Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense to come up with that plan. No later than 45 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, in consultations with the heads of other relevant federal agencies as appropriate, shall submit to the Committees on Appropriations, Armed Services, and Foreign Relations of the Senate and the Committees on Appropriations, Armed Services, and Foreign Affairs of the House of Representatives a strategy regarding United States support for Ukraine against aggression by the Russian Federation, provided that such strategy shall be multi-year, establish specific and achievable objectives, define and prioritize United States national security interests, and include the metrics to be used to measure progress in achieving such objectives. Provided further that such strategy shall include an estimate on a fiscal year by fiscal year basis of the resources required by the United States to achieve such objectives, including to help hasten Ukrainian victory against Russian invasion forces in the manner most favorable to United States interests and objectives, and a description of the national security implications of the United States if these objectives are not met. So apparently we do not have these objectives. We do not have a clear understanding of what's going to happen to the United States interests if Ukraine is not going to prevail, if Russia is going to take over Ukraine. And we're still looking for a strategy. So good to know that we're working on this. It's so disappointing that 2 years after the beginning of this invasion, we still do not have a clear plan. In conclusion, please call your senators, please call your representatives, and mention that this legislation is important and it must pass. You can also mention that immediate military assistance to Ukraine is lacking. They're $5.5 billion, even if it is supplemented with authorizations from the past year, is very insufficient. During 2023 fiscal year, Ukraine received about $12 billion worth of military assistance under PDA program. The 2024 allocation is at best around $9.5 billion. This is a very obvious decrease from a previous year, and as we know, the previous year wasn't supported well. Ukraine didn't do very well defending itself. We certainly need significantly more military aid. So all of these are good talk points when you call your Congress people. Of course, we would like this legislation to pass, unless it's going to be sent back for additional revising. If this happens, then certainly it will be a good opportunity to advocate for changes. However, as long as the document is going to be voted for, we need to make sure the legislation is going to pass. So please call your senators, call your representatives, ask them to make sure that assistance to Ukraine passes. When that happens, remember, Ukraine is not getting enough military assistance. We need to continue pushing for additional funds, additional resources, so Ukraine can win. Thank you very much.